Justice Barrett is actually making some statements, and it's kind of refreshing to hear this, to hear a Supreme Court justice lift back the curtain a little bit.
So Justice Barrett has a book coming out, and many times that's the only time you see Supreme Court justices giving interviews, doing events. They will go and speak to law schools and legal conferences, but this is promoting a book. This is the book is called Listening to the Law. So she did this event last night in the Lincoln Center, and then she also has an upcoming interview with CBS News that we have some sound from. We'll play. But she pushes back on the notion that there's this constitutional crisis. She says, I don't know what a constitutional crisis would look like. I think that our country remains committed to the rule of law. I think we have functioning courts. I think a constitutional crisis we would be in one if the rule of law crumbles, but that is not the place we're at. And she said, I think the Constitution is live and well. This pushes back not only against some of the disagreements that she and Justice Jackson had in their opinions, even in dissents, but even to those judges yesterday that ran to NBC News to voice their distaste and dislike of the way the Supreme Court was operating. I think it's good to see a Supreme Court justice stand strong on this, right, Jordan?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, first of all, because we keep hearing from the justices on the left and the politicians on the left that this Supreme Court has created this constitutional crisis. And I just ask the American people,
failed court,
I ask you if you're, let's say right now, do you believe you're living in a constitutional crisis because of the U.S. Supreme Court and the 9 justices of the Supreme Court? And the answer is likely no. You might disagree with some of their decisions. You might strongly agree with others of their decisions, sometimes from the same justices. You don't have to like 100% of what they do. But that doesn't mean that there's a constitutional crisis because we don't all agree 100% of the time on 100% of the issues. A constitutional crisis is not having the rule of law in place in the United States of America. And again, we always have to watch for that. That's true crisis. The Supreme Court making decisions you may or may not like, that's not a crisis.
And look, I'm sure that it's a nerve-wracking time to do that as Supreme Court justice. As we know, there have been a lot of threats against the Supreme Court justices over the last few years. And Amy Barrett has certainly not been someone who has taken a light stance on many of these. But of course, she's also making press appearances. And Will, I think you wanted to set up a bite here because she's been going on and answering somewhat the same questions. It feels like they all want her to just say, yes, it's a constitutional crisis happening in the country.
Right, which one would be absurd for a sitting Supreme Court justice to say that
Lazy
because that completely undercuts their entire job and position. But this is from Norah O'Donnell at CBS. This is a forthcoming interview. They've been teasing out some clips of it. But this is, and just I want you to pay attention to the framing of this question, which is so absurd. But this is Norah O'Donnell talking to Justice Amy Coney Barrett on CBS News, Bite 4.
President Donald Trump appointed you to cement a conservative legal revolution. Are you concerned about the narrative of this court that it is no longer a separate and co-equal branch of government as designed by the Constitution?
I disagree with that conception of the Supreme Court because the Supreme Court is an independent branch of government. And presidents appoint justices, and presidents have whatever their own motivations are for appointing justices. But once justices serve on the court, the whole point of life tenure and salary protection, which is guaranteed to federal judges by the Constitution, is to ensure their independence from both the executive branch and from Congress.
I mean, just the framing of that question that you were appointed to cement a conservative legal revolution, meaning just adding conservative jurisprudence to the courts in this country? And are you concerned about the narrative? Once again, lazy journalism. Whose narrative? Who's saying that? Right. Other than you, Norah O'Donnell, that the court is no longer a separate and co-equal branch of government. The entire premise there is that if you add conservative jurisprudence to courts, it can no longer be co-equal and separate. It's so absurd.
And it's like she was only put there to submit, not because of her accomplishments as a judge, as an academic, her writings, her how well known she was in judicial circles. No, you were just put there to cement a conservative majority. That's all you are. It's just a yes vote. I mean, already it's a demeaning question right from the start. And I think that, if it was not Norah O'Donnell asking, it would seem pretty sexist as well. Like, They just picked you. They needed to pick a woman who was a conservative, so they picked you to put there. And so there's that part of it. The second part of it, again, too, is because we disagree with the decisions right now of some of the Supreme Court opinions, this court is now no longer a co-equal branch of government. I mean, that's a wake-up call to a lot of us who, I mean, I still think, Article 1, 2, 3 sets up 3 branches of government. And the Supreme Court is really the ultimate branch in the sense that without an enforcement mechanism, we still respect its opinions. When I go back to saying the rule of law is what really defines and makes our country great and different from every country in the world, is it the Supreme Court doesn't need a police force to have the country, whether it's our states or our federal government, follow ultimately its decisions. That doesn't mean they can't later be challenged, but in a peaceful way, in a legal process, not through war.
And in
conflict.
In the concept of having lifetime appointments, and it was controversial. Some people in the comments obviously light up with that. But you have actually a moment where when you do have these extreme pendulum politics that are happening right now, it is a pure protection against that. Obviously, there have been the thoughts of Joe Biden and many of the other ones saying, hey, we got to pack the court. We got to add more justices. We got to do this, playing politics with that system.
Right. The left themselves are the ones trying to take away the independence of it, but yet because she's a conservative with her judicial philosophy, then therefore she must be part of the problem of breaking away the Supreme Court as a co-equal branch of government. But I think this is interesting too, especially in light of what we talked about yesterday with those lower court judges being upset with the Supreme Court and with what Justice Jackson has publicly said. And we can play that as well, because this is what Justice Barrett had to say about the understanding of law and the way that they rule and whether people like it or not. Let's go ahead and play bite one. This is from the interview that will be coming out later this weekend on CBS, once again with Norah O'Donnell. Bite one.
I want Americans to understand the law and that it's not just an opinion poll about whether the Supreme Court thinks something is good or whether the Supreme Court thinks something is bad. Mm-hmm. You know, what the court is trying to do is see what the American people have decided. And sometimes the American people have expressed themselves in the Constitution itself, which is our fundamental law, sometimes in statutes. But the court should not be imposing its own values on the American people. Mm-hmm. That's for the democratic process.
And that is in stark contrast to what we've heard from Justice Jackson, who was being interviewed a lot earlier this year, asking about what her favorite part of the job was being on the Supreme Court. We saw that back and forth between Justice Barrett and Jackson within that Trump v. Casa case, which was about the universal injunctions, where Justice Barrett directly called her out by name from her dissent. And that's the one also where Justice Jackson said that this is going to lead to our collective demise. But let's listen to what Justice Jackson thinks about the role of her as a justice, is what she likes most about it. Bite 11.
I just feel that I have a wonderful opportunity to tell people, in my opinions, how I feel about the issues.
And Jordan,
the exact opposite
that's
of really
part
what
of the
you're supposed to be doing here.
Yeah. I mean, this is again, the idea here,
Ms. Jackson.
Yeah, is that your job is to, you can put forward an opinion or a dissent. Your job is not policy making. Again, if she wants to give lectures on policy, I mean, I guess she can, but it does seem slightly inappropriate because policies will come before the court, and the court's not supposed to look at the policy and say, or the justice and say, I like this policy, so I'm going to find a way to hold it constitutional. I don't like this policy, so I'm going to find a way to hold it unconstitutional. That is how the system of the rule of law falls apart. That's more like a kind of banana republic court system that says we're always going to side with the political side we agree with. It doesn't matter what the legal argument are. And unfortunately, that's what's being taught in a lot of majority of America's law schools, is that you make the Constitution is living to mean whatever it needs to mean for us today, so that we can do what we want today, regardless of restraints that were put in place, it looks like pretty clearly, by the Constitution on the powers of the government.
We have to educate people, because I'm looking at the comments, and a lot of the comments are more siding with what would be Justice Jackson's point of view, which is Amy Barrett has betrayed us, has done things, because like she's not necessarily always voting. And she even talked about that. There was a comment, I have to pull it up, where she specifically, they said, well, how do you feel about the fact that President Trump has gotten kind of mad at you for not 100% siding with you? That is not the job of the Supreme Court justice.
She said to be in this job, you have to not care. You have to have a thick skin. She doesn't have a social media account.
Yeah,
her
husband.
assistant and husband kind of say they'll bring things to her on a need-to-know basis. But I think that's
hopefully they're good at that, because I'll be honest, some of these people,
like, you need to see this right now,
do that to me, and I'm like, I don't. I don't need to see it.
Are you pointing at me?
Maybe. And maybe other people who are watching right now who are
maybe,
like, have you
Bobo
seen
Hogan?
this horrible thing someone said about you?
Yeah.
It's like, you know what, guys? I didn't need to see it. How about you be better censors for me? So maybe Amy Coney Barrett's got a better
That's
team.
fair. But I think also her statement proves the point that she has that different philosophy than Justice Jackson of saying, like, I may even like it within the concept of like political policy. But if the law says one thing, it's not my job to rewrite the law. That would be the definition of an activist judge, which we are so against and what we have fought against at the ACLJ for a very long time.
Yeah, I don't have to agree with every decision Amy Coney Barrett's made as a Supreme Court justice. In fact, I don't. But that doesn't mean that I believe that she's coming from a judicial philosophy, which I wouldn't, that I would typically agree with, a judicial philosophy that would usually probably fit my own and many of our listeners. But sometimes those philosophies can lead different people to different decisions. That's the point of having human beings as Supreme Court justices, and then not just have AI robots decide, well, based off this and this, and we've read through millions of things, this is the decision. These are humans making decisions using their best judgment. And again, I think if you agree with them 100% of the time, you're hoping that you had like kind of the left leaning. And I get that. Sometimes I wish we had Supreme Court justices like those on the left, which you basically
100% of the time rule.
I think if you bet 99, you could bet 100% they'll rule always with whatever is the liberal position, and you'd win 99% of the time. It'd be a great. But you can't do that with conservatives always, and that's because they actually are looking at the bigger picture, not just the policy, but the bigger picture of our Constitution, our laws, and our system of government. That doesn't mean I'm going to defend every bad decision she may make. I like she said, you can criticize it. That doesn't mean it's a crisis.